my name is Daniel Norton and welcome to another edition of the Portcast. On the eve of the huge SANFL game this weekend between Port Adelaide and Glenelg at Alberton, we thought we'd reflect on some of the great rivalries between Port Adelaide and Glenelg. And former big man here at the Port Adelaide Football Club and current Magpies assistant coach Brett Chalmers, who had his own piece of magic against Glenelg back in 1992, is kindly joining us this afternoon here on the Podcast. Brett, how are you?
Good.
Mate, we'll start off with your journey to Port Adelaide. We know you're a Port Adelaide person through and through, and you played for the Maggies, you played for the Power, now you're back here in a coaching capacity, which is great. But tell us about your journey to Port Adelaide when you first kicked off your career back in the early 90s.
Well, I guess I was in Port Adelaide's recruiting area in the country there, Peninsula, so I was always, I guess, going to be a Port Adelaide player at some stage, just with developing through, and moved over as a 16-year-old and, went through the system there, played a few under-17 games and under-19s and then, reserves and into the league. So I guess, my time come over, I moved over at the start of 1990 and at that time Port Adelaide had won 2 premierships back-to-back and were going for a third. So, there was a lot of hype around the club and exciting times. And I guess, as a younger fella, you were looking up to the players that were here at that time and it was, it was very exciting. It was, it was great fun, and then there was a lot of young country lads that had come over at the same time, so it was easy to settle in. We had a lot of fun, and I guess because we were winning, it was easy to have fun.
Absolutely. I mean, you came at such an exciting time. You mentioned 1990, and Port Adelaide's bid for the AFL back then, and the club went on to beat Glenelg in that Glenelg in that 1990 grand final, which obviously you made your debut the following year, but you must have had dreams, and it must have been a real thrill to come here to Alberton to play with some of your childhood heroes.
Oh, it was huge. And I still remember, one of the first times I got asked to train with the league side, and I just couldn't believe that I was running around with the likes of Mark Williams and Greg Phillips and Tim Ginniver and Roger Delaney, Scott Hodges, and those. It just opened my eyes up and couldn't believe it. And within 12 months, you're playing football with them. So hey, it's a great club, and I loved it from day dot. As soon as they welcome you with open arms, and again, you look at the games that we had to play against Glenelg. There was a massive games, huge crowds, and I guess there was always rivalry between them. It was just the way it was. Glenelg had won a few premierships in the 80s, and Port Adelaide took over that mantle in the late 80s and early 90s, and it was always a bit of a go against each other.
Well, it was massive, and the rivalry really sort of built from '77, I guess, when Port won that grand final against Glenelg, and then 1981 again, and then there was some unfortunate on-field clashes between the two clubs, where there was a couple of really fiery encounters. I remember obviously the David Granger incidents, but I remember one of my heroes, Greg Anderson, getting knocked out by Scott Salisbury in a final as well. So it almost became one of the great rivalries of South Australian football. Everyone talks about Port Adelaide and Norwood and having that intense rivalry, which is obviously true, but the Port Glenelg one is not far behind it.
Oh, definitely. And I remember, I was only just thinking about it there, and I still remember down at the Bay Oval, we played down there. It was early in the year. We'd started off well in '92. It was a big game. Big crowds were back then. Like they would have had 7,000 or 8,000 easy there. And it was John Seabohm's testimonial, and I remember, a guy playing for us, Paddy Brosnan, and got him behind the play, and I think John Seabohm might end up sitting on the bench for the rest of the game, because I think he got him that well that knocked him out. And that was just it. It was hard, tough footy. We played him again later in the year, and Johnny Fitch got Danny Hughes. And I don't know whether that was a bit of payback just from the game before.
Square up,
a bit of a square up. And then, grand final day, knowing Danny as Danny, how hard and tough he was, just didn't know what was going to happen. Like, he was at the end of his career, whether he was going to finish it off with Fidji and get him back, but it never eventuated. But hey, it was still hard and tough. Like you said, you mentioned, the likes of, Scott Salisbury, who was known as a bit of a sniper and that, and you always had to keep your wits about him, especially as a young fella. You just didn't know what to expect from the guy, but the players I played with looked after us really well.
Well, Gavin Wanganeen said the same thing. Scott Salisbury stood him, of course, in the 1990 grand final. He was a little skinny 16-year-old, and Greg Phillips and David Hines and company said, keep your hands off, otherwise it'll be a long day for you. 92, so let's recall that grand final, because Port Adelaide did beat Glenelg in 88 and 1990. Did you go into playing Glenelg in these big games with an air of expectation and real confidence that you could get the job done?
Oh, I don't know about that we were going to win. I think we knew we could do it if we put it all together, and I guess that day it was a warmer sort of a day to start off. Like they jumped us pretty early, and probably if they kicked straight, probably would have been a lot further in front than what they were. I think they were in front at quarter time. Then we slowly pegged them back, and it was I know it was pretty windy coming from the north, and then just before half time, that's when the rain came in, and and it rained pretty heavily, for the remainder of the match, and I think even after half time we kicked pretty accurate. I think we were pretty accurate after half time in the wet, but I don't know. There was a few things that went our way. A few goals were kicked, and I think going in at half time, we probably had a fair bit of belief in ourselves that. We're on top of them, and we just had to go out there and, the first 15, 20 minutes of that third quarter, if we could do the same, play the same the way we finished off, I reckon we would have them. So
absolutely, I remember that. Yeah, I mean, it was almost a stormy sort of day, wasn't it? It started off really warm, and then when the rain came and Port had a 4 or 5 goal lead at half time, it was always going to be difficult for Glenelg to peak back. Getting back to yourself, and I know it's always hard to talk about yourself, particularly at a club like Port Adelaide, which is always about the team and not the individual, but you had an amazing moment that we all remember that really kick-started Port Adelaide that day, and there was a breeze coming from the north that day, but not strong enough to make the ball go 80 metres. So tell us about that extraordinary 80-metre goal from almost the centre of the ground that went to the southern end.
Again, at the time, I guess, my mindset was that, David Hutton, I think, handballed or kicked it to me, turned around and took the mark and played on, and I knew that, Scotty Hodges, the way he played, he was one-on-one in the goal square. And I thought, if I can get it in him, it's a big chance for him to out-muscle, I think he might have been standing Rouvray that day, Paul Rouvray. Yeah. And Scotty being a lot stronger there, I thought he'd be able to push him out the road. And I guess, got hold of it, kicked it, and it went over his head and went through. So it was just... I don't know,
so you weren't going for goal?
No. My mindset was to try and kick it to Scott as a one-on-one.
Yeah.
And I guess, I gave it as much as I could to try and get it that distance. But yeah, there was a bit of a breeze, and people say I was a torp or whatever, but it was a drop punt.
Yeah.
But again, the whole idea was to try and get it to Scott, and it just went a bit further than expected, but to our advantage.
Absolutely amazing. Do you remember any other Glenelg encounters that particularly stick to mind? I personally remember a game in '93. I'm not sure if you played in that qualifying final when Hodges kicked about 5 in the first quarter against Glenelg at Footy Park.
Would have played.
Which was an amazing game, and we got the better of them. And then there were some other times when Glenelg, I think round 1, 1995, absolutely hammered Port Adelaide. So it does go both ways occasionally.
Oh, definitely it does. And I guess the biggest thing from that '92 premiership, played with the likes of, like Mark Williams, and, 6 months later he was coaching them. Took over and coached, and, and you just think, how different is that? A bloke you'd played in a premiership with, and, 6 months later he's coaching against you, and kickstart his coaching career. But it was an amazing time, like I said, to play with the guys I played with, and just the rivalry we had with Glenelg. Like you mentioned, all the games and that. And even now, we played down the Bay this year, and I broke my jaw down there one day, and it's just the way the games were. Like they were so intense and so hard that you gave it all costs. I didn't know I broke my jaw until I come off the ground after and went to bite a sandwich, and it was broken. So I couldn't bite into the sandwich, and went to the doc and said, I think I've done something. And sure enough, it was a broken jaw. But that was against Glenelg. I think you just gave everything you did just to try and beat them.
So as an assistant coach now, to the playing group, to this modern playing group, do you draw upon some of that rivalry and that great heritage between Port Adelaide and Glenelg, for this weekend's game?
You do, and you try against all the clubs. I was lucky enough to play in such a successful time. Right through when I arrived until I retired. I don't think we missed out on the finals at all. And you try and just speak to the players about, the way we played, different sides, whether it's Glenelg, Eagles, Centrals, whoever, that we didn't give up. We started out and, we went as hard as we could and looked after each other as much as we could throughout the whole game. There was no individuals in our game. You have a look, I think the biggest and probably the greatest player that I played was probably Nathan Buckley, and Bucks was just a level above everybody at the age he was. And but again, he won the McGarry medal, but it was a team effort. Someone had to get in the ball to do that. And out now, I think that's what we're trying to get into everybody, that you know, like for us to win a game, it's not up to the top 6 or 7 best players are going to win it. It's the 21 guys that take the field that day. You know, they're the ones that are going to take it too. And I guess, you know, being with, you know, Brian Lees has come back into the club, which has made a huge difference and been successful. You know, Brian Binky, Paul Evans, myself, and I played with Craig Smith, who's the backline coach in under-19s, and we were, you know, had some pretty fun times and successful then. So, you know, we've all been around that culture, and we know we're just trying to mould it back together again. And I think it's starting to work. There's bits and pieces that are starting to show now that, you know, at the start of the year we started off right and then we fell away, but I think now we've got back to the basics of footy and playing for each other. You know, it's starting to work again.
It's a real late 90s premiership reunion with the coaching group here at the Maggies now. And I know that's warmed a lot of Port Adelaide supporters' hearts to have you and Brian Binky and so forth back. So it is fantastic. Can we just talk about your AFL career as well? Because, of course, I mean, you're a fantastic player and you had that opportunity at Adelaide for 50-odd games, I think, and then you transferred back home to Port Adelaide in 1998 and played a couple of seasons with the Power. Before that, though, you had an extraordinary sort of introduction to the AFL, so to speak, at the end of 1992 with that controversial AFL National Draft where I'm not sure if it's legend, but that you wrote to some 10 clubs and said, don't worry about drafting me because all I want to do is play for Collingwood. Can you give us an insight as to what actually played out there?
You know, I was lucky, I guess, lucky or unlucky enough to be drafted when I was still over on the Eyre Peninsula. Played Till Cup in '89 and got drafted by Richmond. And back then you were drafted for 3 years. That was the system then. And you know, like they were on to me about moving over and whatever else. And I wanted to come to Port Adelaide first. That was my dream, to come over here first. You know, like they were the biggest thing that were. We never heard much about the VFL. Like SNFL was huge back then. It was massive. And I guess that was my goal, to come over first and, you know, come over and you know, like at the end of 92, I guess, went back into the draft again and was never going to go to Richmond. Like I wanted to go to a stable club. 3 years I've been drafted. I'd have 3 different coaches in that time. So, you know, to come to Port Adelaide who'd had, you know, such a big base and, you know, just the foundation was there and, you know, Jack was the coach and been the coach for a while, and you know, captains have been there for, you know, years and whatever. So the time come up for the draft again, and obviously there was a fair bit of, I guess, you know, look at myself, go to different clubs, and you know, I guess till this day, you know, like whatever club drafted me, I would have went, no matter what. But I looked at it. Collingwood was probably the most professional club that I compared them with Port Adelaide. That, you know, the way they approached me, the way they spoke to me, and I guess getting feedback from, you know, guys that have been there, Bruce Abernathy, Paul Rosonico, Greg Phillips, Choco, and I guess Jack as well, because Jack had coached there. And I guess I felt that a bit of an alliance there. And, you know, time came up and there was 2 other guys that wrote letters before I did. Andrew McKay went to Carlton, and Robert Pyman, he went to North Melbourne.
From West Torrens,
That's it. And I guess they said to me about it, you know, like, are you going to write letters? We've done it. And I went, oh, you have? And I went, oh. Anyway, I sat down and had a chat with, you know, the late Bob Clayton, who was, I guess, sort of a manager to me and a mentor. And thought, well, you know, it's not going to hurt. So, you know, we scribed some letters and it said that, you know, I was going to play for Port Adelaide in 1993 and then therefore go to the club of my choice after that. I didn't say anything about Collingwood. Just so happened that Collingwood was draft pick 10 and I sent them to the first 9 clubs before that.
Right.
And that's how it worked out that, you know, in the end, went to the AFL Tribunal. And,
so you got a rap over the knuckles?
I was found prejudicial to the draft system. Jeff Motley accompanied me over there, had a barrister representing me. They came out, I think I was in there for quite a few hours, which was a lot of, you know, jargon and lingo. They were talking with their lawyers and, came out they were going to fine me the maximum of $50,000 and ban me for 3 years for Collingwood.
Really?
Yeah.
An individual fine of $50,000?
Yeah. In the end they fined me $30,000 and banned me from 3 years from Collingwood. So, and I guess that's, you know, to me, I was 19 at the time, and I guess
a lot of money.
Probably pretty devastated that you know, like that could happen to a player. That all I want to do was play footy. And like I said, whatever club drafted me, I would have went there. Whether Richmond redrafted me, Sydney, Brisbane, whatever. And there was a lot of clubs talking, and I didn't think that that any of them would stick by it.
Did you get into any legal advice about taking him on for Australian trade
no,
at the time?
Not
or
at
you
the
just
time.
thought,
No, not at the time. I just think it was, hey, let's just put this behind us and try and at least forge an AFL career.
Yeah.
And from there, I got traded to the Crows. Like for Brenton Sanderson, he went from the Crows to the Magpies.
The irony there, in terms of where he's at the moment.
And then back to there for 4 years. And
do you enjoy your time with the Crows?
Oh, it was different. The club was new.
How do they treat you in regards to coming back to Port Adelaide and then going back to the Crows? Had by 1994 all that sort of ill feeling dissipated?
Oh, probably not. It was very segregated little groups. Still, because they didn't have the big facilities they got there. We just trained, in one of the change rooms. That's where we had a weights room there. All our work was done out in Max Bashir Reserve Oval, and there was, it was huge. There was a lot of hype around, the Crows, an AFL club in Adelaide, but there was still, like little pockets of, players that Port Adelaide players with Port Adelaide boys, and Glenelg would stay with Glenelg and whatever. And it was so hard. Like, I enjoyed my footy more when I came back here, and probably played better footy when I came back here.
You took to the Power or the Magpies?
To the
Magpies, yes.
Just felt relaxed, knew what I had to do, familiar faces around me, guys knew how I played, and probably played a hell of a lot better footy than I did when I was at the Crows. And it was. And I know when Malcolm came along, Blight, he changed that dramatically, and got the results straight away. And I was always excited about coming back to Port Adelaide
to play for Power.
Yeah, definitely. It was always how I would have loved to have come back the first year. I'd only just signed a new contract before they came in, and I guess they were looking at more a high profile player as well. But once the chance came, I was dead set keen as to get back.
Enjoyed your couple of seasons.
I did. Hey, things didn't work out. Like injuries took the better of me, and finished up retiring at 27. So went back to the Magpies, played a season, or tried to play a season there, and just end up playing with injections and whatever in my knee, and that was it. Retired.
Nasty.
So.
On a closing note, the Olympics are on, obviously, at the moment, and we're having a ball watching our athletes and swimming and so forth. We understand that one of your sons, Kyle, a magnificent young swimmer. Can you give us an understanding of where he's at in his career, and could we see him in the Olympics one day?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Hey, that's a goal that he set. He sat down and set his goals there probably 2 months ago again, and that's one of his goals that down the track. Hey, whether it's Rio or the one after that, but I think at this stage he's looking forward to it. He took swimming on just as swimming, just learned to swim. We were in Port-Glenelg at that time. One of the ladies over there, who's the coach of the side over there, said, "Why don't you come out?" And he wasn't interested. And it wasn't until that he got picked in a SAPSARS swimming competition, came over, had 3 swims, won 3 gold medals, and it's taken off from there. He represented South Australia that year, and I guess one of the reasons to move back to Adelaide was to probably give him a bit more of a chance. We were travelling over and back a fair bit, and hey, at this stage he's 14, size 14 feet, 6 foot, nearly 6'1", growing, and just been away. He represented Australia in a Trans-Tasman competition against New Zealand, and he trains hard. He does 5 sessions a week. He probably swims between 25 and 30 k's a week, and puts in the time and the effort, and it's slowly starting to reap its time back. But again, he loves his footy, and whichever way he goes, if he followed his footy, I'd push him that way, and with swimming, I chase him around with swimming at this stage, and still plays footy. So
brilliant stuff. So we could still see him in the prison bars one day.
We could, and I was hoping they offered him to come out for a development squad, but he said, "I want to give swimming a chance this year." And to me personally, I was a bit devastated. I couldn't believe it, but hey, it's his choice, and he knew. I think he was just time management. He couldn't fit it in, and he's a kid that wants to give as much as he can to everything at that time. He gives his best as best as he can do. And hey, if next year he gets another opportunity, I'm no doubt, hopefully he'll take a chance and and have a go at footy.
Brilliant, multi-talented, fantastic. Brett, thanks for joining us on the portcast this afternoon. It's been an absolute pleasure. We wish yourself all the best for the remainder of the year with the Magpies and young Kyle, and it's been fantastic. Obviously with his career, but it's also been fantastic reliving some of the great rivalry moments between Port Adelaide and Glenelg over the years.
No worries, thank you.
Thanks, Brett.